You watch others achieve breakthrough success while you work just as hard, follow the same strategies, yet somehow they always seem to have an unfair advantage. Every day you give your best effort, but you're starting to wonder if there's a secret weapon that winners possess, something that separates those who achieve from those who merely try. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist whose principles have guided victorious leaders for over 2,500 years, from ancient battlefields to modern boardrooms. What I discovered about the ultimate weapon of success will transform how you approach every challenge, giving you the same advantage that has created winners throughout history. The battlefield may have changed from ancient China to today's competitive world, but the secret weapon I'll share remains as powerful now as it was then. But first, like this video, subscribe for more ancient wisdom applied to modern success, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to wield this ultimate weapon. Let me share with you how I discovered this ultimate weapon, because my journey began with crushing defeat. In my early years as a military strategist, I believed what everyone believes, that victory belongs to the strongest, the most disciplined, the hardest working. I commanded armies with superior numbers, better training, more resources. Yet I watched in bewilderment as smaller, seemingly weaker forces defeated my carefully prepared troops. There's a cracked war tablet I keep in my study, a reminder of my first devastating loss. I had planned everything perfectly: troop formations, supply lines, battle tactics. My soldiers were ready to die for victory, but within hours we were retreating in chaos. The enemy general had won before the first sword was drawn, and I couldn't understand how. That defeat shattered my conventional thinking. I became obsessed with studying victorious generals who seemed to possess an invisible advantage. I spent years analyzing their methods, interviewing survivors, studying battlefield reports. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about winning. These successful leaders weren't necessarily stronger or smarter. They had something else, something that made their victories seem effortless, while others struggled for every small gain. They possessed a secret weapon that turned ordinary effort into extraordinary results. I realized that while I had been focused on building better armies, they had been focused on creating better positions. While I prepared for battle, they were winning wars before the fighting began. This revelation became the foundation of everything I would teach about strategy and success. Through decades of study and application, I codified this secret weapon into principles that have guided leaders for over 2 millennia. What I'm about to share with you is, in theory, it's the distilled wisdom of someone who learned that true victory comes not from fighting harder, but from fighting smarter. The secret weapon isn't what you do in the moment of competition. It's how you position yourself long before that moment arrives. The secret weapon that every winner uses is this: superior information combined with strategic positioning. While others fight battles, winners choose which battles to fight, and they choose battles they've already won. I keep a polished bronze mirror in my study, not for vanity, but as a daily reminder that the greatest battles are won in the mind before they're ever fought in reality. Every morning, I would look into that mirror and ask myself, what do I know that my enemies don't? Where can I position myself so that victory becomes inevitable? Let me tell you about the Battle of Buyu, where I first wielded this secret weapon with devastating effect. The enemy outnumbered us 3-1. Conventional wisdom said we should retreat or negotiate surrender, but I had spent months gathering intelligence about their supply routes, their commanders' personalities, their internal conflicts. I knew something they didn't. Their army was already fracturing from within. Instead of attacking their strength, I positioned my forces to exploit their hidden weakness. I leaked false information about our troop movements, causing their paranoid generals to turn on each other. Within days, Their superior force collapsed without us losing a single soldier. We won because we had better information and positioned ourselves to use it. This is what separates winners from everyone else. Most people see only what's obvious: the competition directly in front of them, the immediate obstacles, the apparent challenges. Winners see what others miss. They gather information others ignore, recognize patterns others overlook, and position themselves where success becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Think about every major success story you know. The entrepreneur who started their company just before a market shift they saw coming. The employee who positioned themselves perfectly for a promotion everyone else missed. The investor who bought when others were selling because they understood something the crowd didn't. They weren't necessarily smarter or luckier. They had superior information and used it to position themselves strategically. While others were working harder, winners were working with an unfair advantage available to anyone willing to develop this secret weapon. The beauty of this principle is that it applies far beyond warfare. In business, relationships, career advancement, even personal development, those who consistently win are those who see opportunities others miss and position themselves to capitalize on them before anyone else realizes the game has changed. Information is the foundation of every victory. Yet most people gather only the information that's freely available to everyone. I built my reputation on what I call the network of whispers, a sophisticated system of scouts, merchants, and informants who provided me with intelligence that my enemies couldn't access. In ancient China, I learned that battles are won by generals who know not just their own capabilities, but their enemies' plans, weaknesses, and intentions. I would send merchants into enemy territories weeks before any conflict, not to trade, but to observe. I cultivated relationships with defectors, captured scouts, even servants in enemy camps, while my opponents planned their strategies based on assumptions. I planned mine based on facts. I remember one campaign where my information network revealed that the enemy general had a gambling addiction and massive debts. Instead of preparing for a military assault, I arranged for his creditors to call in their loans simultaneously. Within days, his own officers arrested him for attempting to sell military supplies to pay his debts. We captured an entire city without drawing a sword, simply because I knew something about their leader that even his own army didn't know. Today's world offers even more opportunities for information advantage. While your competitors rely on industry reports everyone else reads, you can discover trends by talking directly to customers, suppliers, and frontline employees. While others make decisions based on last quarter's data, you can identify shifts happening right now. The key is to develop multiple information sources that others don't have. Connect with people in adjacent industries who see changes before they reach your field. Follow the money track where investment and resources are flowing before it becomes public knowledge. Listen to complaints and frustrations that reveal unmet needs others haven't noticed. I've watched modern leaders build fortunes by understanding regulatory changes before their competitors, identifying demographic shifts before they became obvious, recognizing technology trends while others dismissed them as fads. They succeeded because they invested in superior information gathering. Most people wait for information to reach them through normal channels. Winners actively hunt for information others don't have. They build relationships specifically to gain insights. They ask questions others don't think to ask. They notice patterns in seemingly unrelated events. The information advantage isn't about having access to secret data, it's about seeing connections and implications that others miss. Even when looking at the same information, it's about asking better questions and building better sources of insight. My most fundamental principle has always been this: The supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. This isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about positioning yourself so strategically that victory becomes inevitable before any direct competition begins. I keep detailed strategic maps from my campaigns, hand-drawn battlefield layouts that show not just troop positions, but terrain advantages, supply routes, escape paths, and psychological pressure points. These maps taught me that where you position yourself determines the outcome, more than how hard you fight once you're there. Let me share the story that crystallized this principle for me. I was facing an enemy force positioned on high ground, with superior numbers and defensive advantages. Every military manual said we should retreat or find another route. Instead, I studied the terrain for weeks and discovered something remarkable. Their strong position had a fatal flaw. Their water supply came from a single mountain stream that passed through our territory first, rather than attack their strength. I positioned my forces to control their weakness. We didn't block their water completely, that would have been obvious. Instead, we introduced subtle contaminants that wouldn't kill but would weaken and demoralize their troops over time. Within a month, their impregnable fortress became a liability as sick soldiers began deserting. They eventually abandoned their position without us ever mounting a direct assault. This is strategic positioning, making yourself indispensable rather than competing directly. In today's world, this means positioning yourself at the intersection of important trends before others recognize the opportunity. It means building relationships with key decision makers before you need their support. It means developing skills that will be crucial tomorrow, not just useful today. I've observed modern leaders who position themselves as the bridge between departments that rarely communicate, becoming invaluable to both sides. Others position themselves as the expert in emerging technologies or changing regulations, making themselves the go-to person when those changes create opportunities or challenges. The art is to position yourself where natural forces work in your favor rather than against you. Just as I chose battlegrounds where terrain gave us advantages, you must choose career moves, business strategies, and life decisions where market forces, social trends, and technological changes support your goals. Most people position themselves reactively. They respond to opportunities after they become obvious to everyone. Strategic positioning means anticipating where opportunities will emerge and being there first. It means creating situations where success flows naturally from your position, rather than requiring constant effort to maintain. When you position yourself correctly, competitors exhaust themselves, trying to reach where you already stand. Opportunities come to you because you're where opportunities naturally appear. You win not by fighting harder, but by making the fight unnecessary. I must confess something that took me years to understand. All the strategic positioning and superior information in the world means nothing if you cannot master yourself first. In my early campaigns, I possessed brilliant strategies but lacked the inner discipline to execute them consistently under pressure. There's a sword in my study that I sharpened every morning, not because it needed daily maintenance, but because the ritual taught me that self-mastery, like blade maintenance, requires constant attention. The edge that cuts through obstacles is the same edge that cuts through your own weaknesses and limitations. I learned this lesson during a campaign where I had perfect intelligence about enemy movements and ideal positioning for victory. But when the moment came to execute my strategy, anger clouded my judgment. An enemy commander had insulted my heritage, and I allowed personal emotion to override strategic thinking. I abandoned my carefully planned approach for a direct assault driven by wounded pride. We won that battle, but at tremendous cost losses that could have been avoided if I had maintained emotional discipline. That night, sitting among my wounded soldiers, I realized that the greatest enemy isn't external opposition, it's the internal chaos that prevents clear thinking when it matters most. Fear, anger, greed, pride, impatience. These emotions turn superior strategies into inferior results. They make you reactive when you need to be strategic, impulsive when you need to be calculated. From that moment forward, I developed daily practices for mental clarity. Each morning, I would spend time in meditation, not to find peace, but to train my mind to remain calm in chaos. I practiced scenarios in my imagination, rehearsing how I would respond to setbacks, provocations, and unexpected developments. I studied my own patterns of thinking and emotional response as carefully as I studied enemy behavior. The connection between inner mastery and outer advantage became clear. Strategic thinking requires emotional stability. When your mind is turbulent with fear or desire, you cannot see opportunities that require patience to develop. When anger or pride drives your decisions, you lose the flexibility needed to adapt to changing circumstances. Self-mastery amplifies every other advantage you possess. Superior information becomes worthless if emotions prevent you from acting on it objectively. Perfect positioning fails if you abandon it due to impatience or fear. The most brilliant strategy crumbles if you lack the discipline to execute it consistently. I learned to treat my mind like a weapon that needed constant training and maintenance. I practiced delayed gratification, choosing long-term strategic gains over short-term emotional satisfaction. I developed the ability to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly when others panic, to see opportunities when others see only threats. This internal foundation becomes the bedrock upon which all external success is built. Master yourself first, and mastering your circumstances becomes not just possible, but inevitable. I kept detailed scrolls containing personality analyses and behavioral patterns of every rival general I faced. These weren't just military assessments, they were psychological profiles that revealed how each commander thought, what motivated them, what frightened them, and most importantly, what blind spots they possessed that I could exploit. Most generals studied enemy troop numbers and weapons. I studied enemy minds. I learned that General Wei always attacked at dawn because he believed surprise gave maximum advantage. But this predictability became his weakness. Commander Liu never retreated from any position. Viewing withdrawal as cowardice, I would bait him into defending indefensible positions. Marshal Chen trusted no one completely, so I fed him contradictory intelligence through multiple sources, paralyzing him with indecision. I remember one campaign where I faced General Zhong, renowned for never losing a siege. Rather than study his siege techniques, I studied the man himself. I discovered he had lost his father in a siege as a child and was psychologically incapable of withdrawing from any fortified position. Even when strategically wise, I used this knowledge to lure his entire army into besieging an empty fortress while I captured his real objective, the supply depot that fed 3 provinces. The principle extends far beyond warfare. In every competitive arena, success comes from understanding not just what your competitors do, but why they do it. Their psychological patterns reveal predictable behaviors you can anticipate and counter. I've observed modern leaders who study their industry competitors with the same psychological depth I applied to enemy generals. They learn which rivals always rush to market first, which ones never abandon failed strategies, which ones consistently underestimate certain types of challenges. This knowledge becomes a roadmap for strategic positioning. The key is to look beyond surface actions to underlying motivations and limitations. Does your competitor always choose the safe option? Create situations where risk-taking becomes necessary. Do they pride themselves on innovation? Position yourself where innovation becomes a liability rather than an asset. Are they driven by ego? Use their need for recognition against them. But studying competition isn't just about exploitation, about learning. I gained more strategic insights from analyzing successful enemy tactics than from celebrating my own victories. Every competitor possesses some advantage or insight you lack. The wise strategist learns from everyone, even especially from those they oppose. You must understand their strengths to avoid competing directly where they excel. You must identify their weaknesses to position yourself where they cannot follow. You must recognize their patterns to anticipate their moves before they make them. Most importantly, study what your competitors ignore or dismiss. Their blind spots often reveal the greatest opportunities. What problems do they consider unsolvable? What markets do they view as unprofitable? What approaches do they consider impossible? Their limitations often define your greatest possibilities for strategic advantage. I keep an ancient sundial in my study, not to tell time, but to remind myself that opportunity has its own rhythm. Winners move when others pause, strike when others hesitate, and withdraw when others rush forward. Perfect timing transforms ordinary actions into extraordinary results. In my early campaigns, I lost more battles to poor timing than to superior enemies. I would attack too early, before all conditions aligned, or too late, after the moment of advantage had passed. I learned that there's a precise window for every strategic move. Miss it by days, or even hours, and the same action that could have brought victory instead guarantees defeat. I discovered this principle during a siege where I had spent months preparing the perfect assault. My intelligence was flawless, my positioning ideal, my troops ready. But I waited for even better conditions, clearer weather, one more piece of intelligence, absolute certainty of success. While I hesitated, the enemy received reinforcements. That made my carefully planned attack impossible. My overcaution transformed a certain victory into a forced retreat. From that failure, I developed what I call the opportunity window recognition system. I learned to identify the exact moment when all necessary conditions converge, when your information advantage is maximum, your positioning is optimal, your resources are adequate, and your competition is unprepared. This moment rarely lasts long, and it rarely comes twice. The secret is recognizing that perfect conditions never exist. You act when conditions are sufficient, not when they're perfect. I learned to identify the minimum viable conditions for success rather than waiting for maximum possible conditions. The general who waits for perfect weather never fights a battle in modern contexts. I've observed leaders who recognize these timing windows with remarkable precision. They launch products just as market conditions shift in their favor. They change careers at the exact moment when their industry experience becomes valuable in a different field. They invest when others are selling, not because they enjoy risk, but because they recognize when temporary conditions create permanent advantages. The key is distinguishing between preparation time and action time. During preparation time, you gather information, build relationships, develop skills, and position yourself. During action time, you execute decisively based on the preparation you've already completed. Most people confuse these phases. They either act without adequate preparation or prepare without adequate action. Timing also means knowing when not to act. I've avoided more disasters by recognizing when conditions weren't right than have achieved victories by moving at the perfect moment. Sometimes the wisest move is waiting until your competition exhausts itself against obstacles you recognized and avoided. Perfect timing isn't about luck or intuition. It's about patient observation followed by decisive action. It's about building systems that help you recognize opportunity windows when they appear and having the courage to act when others are paralyzed by uncertainty. My Jade Alliance seal sits on my desk as a reminder that individual strength, no matter how great, multiplies exponentially through strategic partnerships. The most important battles I won were not won by my armies alone, but by coalitions I built with former enemies, unlikely partners, and shared interests that others failed to recognize. Early in my career, I believed that trusting others was weakness. I thought strategic independence meant never depending on anyone else's support. This thinking cost me dearly when I faced a coalition of 3 rival kingdoms while fighting alone. Despite superior tactics and brave soldiers, we were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. I learned that night that lone wolves, no matter how fierce, rarely defeat coordinated packs. From that defeat, I developed what became my most powerful strategic weapon, the ability to transform enemies into allies and strangers, into strategic partners. I discovered that every person, including your opponents, has interests that don't directly conflict with yours. The art is finding those shared interests and building mutually beneficial relationships around them. I remember negotiating with General Huang, whose army had been destroying my supply lines for months. Instead of continuing our costly conflict, I studied his situation and discovered he was fighting me only because his province was starving due to failed harvests. Rather than defeating him militarily, I offered to share our surplus grain in exchange for his army's protection of our northern borders against barbarian raids. Within weeks, my most dangerous enemy became my most valuable ally. This principle transformed how I approached every relationship. Instead of seeing only competition or cooperation, I learned to see potential for strategic alliance. I would identify what each person needed most, what they feared most, and what they could offer that I needed. Then I would create scenarios where helping me helped them achieve their own goals. Modern leaders who mastered this principle build networks that seem almost magical in their effectiveness. They connect people who need each other, creating goodwill and obligation. They identify mutual interests between apparent competitors, facilitating partnerships that benefit everyone involved. They position themselves as valuable connectors, making themselves indispensable to multiple networks. Simultaneously, the key is approaching relationships strategically without being manipulative. Genuine mutual benefit creates stronger alliances than selfish manipulation. I learned to create value for others before asking for value in return, building trust through demonstrated reliability rather than mere promises. Successful alliances require clear communication about expectations, contributions, and benefits. I would formalize agreements not because I distrusted my allies, but because clarity prevents misunderstandings that destroy partnerships. Both parties must gain more from the alliance than they contribute to it, or the relationship becomes unsustainable. Build alliances before you need them. The time to develop relationships is when you have something to offer, not when you need something desperately. Plant seeds of mutual benefit during times of strength, so you can harvest support during times of need. I carry a smooth riverstone in my pocket, worn down by countless years of flowing water. It reminds me that, like water, the wise adapt to any container while maintaining their essential nature. Rigid strategies break under pressure, but flexible principles flow around obstacles and find new paths to victory. In my early years, I confused consistency with rigidity. I would develop elaborate battle plans and refuse to deviate from them, even when conditions changed dramatically. I believed that changing strategy showed weakness or indecision. This stubborn thinking cost me several battles where victory was possible, but only through adaptation I refused to make. The lesson came during a campaign where I had planned a dawn attack on an enemy camp. Our intelligence was perfect, our positioning ideal, our timing precise. But as we approached, we discovered the enemy had abandoned their camp during the night and repositioned on high ground. My original plan was now impossible, but I was so invested in my strategy that I ordered the attack anyway. We suffered terrible losses trying to execute a plan that no longer matched reality. That night, studying the enemy's new position, I realized they had actually given me a better opportunity than my original plan would have provided. Their hasty repositioning had left their supply lines exposed and their escape routes limited. If I had been willing to adapt immediately, I could have achieved total victory with minimal losses. Instead, my inflexibility turned advantage into disaster. From that failure, I developed what I call the flowing water strategy. Like water, I learned to maintain my essential objective while adapting my methods to whatever container or circumstances I encountered. I began treating every plan as a starting point, not a destination. I trained myself to see changed conditions as new opportunities rather than obstacles to my original intention. This means staying committed to your ultimate goals while remaining flexible about the methods to achieve them. The enemy changes position. Find a better angle of attack. Market conditions shift. Adjust your approach while maintaining your core value proposition. Technology disrupts your industry. Learn to use the disruption as an accelerator rather than fighting against it. I learned to build adaptation into my strategies from the beginning. Instead of creating one perfect plan, I would develop multiple contingency approaches. I would identify the assumptions my strategies depended on and create alternative paths when those assumptions proved wrong. I treated uncertainty not as a problem to be solved, but as a reality to be leveraged. The leaders who thrive in changing environments are those who change faster than their circumstances. They see shifts before their competitors do, adapt their strategies before changes become obvious, and position themselves to benefit from instability, while others struggle to maintain outdated approaches. Adaptation requires letting go of ego, attachment to specific methods, while strengthening commitment to fundamental objectives. The wise strategist adapts everything except their core principles. On my desk sits a theater mask, a reminder that controlling what others believe about your intentions is one of the most powerful weapons in any strategist's arsenal. I'm not speaking of dishonesty or betrayal, but of strategic ambiguity, art of revealing what serves your purpose while concealing what doesn't. That the difference between deception and lying is crucial. Lying destroys trust and creates enemies. Strategic deception protects your advantages while creating opportunities. It's about controlling information flow, not fabricating false information. It's about letting others draw incorrect conclusions from incomplete data rather than providing them with complete intelligence about your plans. I learned this principle during a campaign where I was badly outnumbered and needed to prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching the main battle. Rather than dividing my already small force, I created the illusion of a much larger army through strategic deception. I had my soldiers light extra campfires at night, march in circles to create dust clouds suggesting massive troop movements, and spread rumors through merchants about reinforcements that didn't exist. The enemy general, facing what he believed was a superior force, delayed his attack and sent desperate messages for additional troops. By the time he discovered my actual numbers, I had already achieved my objective through positioning and timing rather than direct confrontation. I won because he made decisions based on what he thought was happening rather than what was actually happening. Modern applications of this principle are everywhere. The entrepreneur who doesn't reveal their true market strategy until after securing key partnerships. The job candidate who emphasizes certain qualifications while downplaying others, not through lies, but through selective emphasis. The negotiator who lets the other party believe they have more leverage than they actually possess. The key is understanding that people make decisions based on their perception of reality, not reality itself. Your job is to manage those perceptions ethically while protecting your strategic advantages. This means being truthful in what you say while being strategic about what you choose to say. And when you choose to say it, I developed techniques for misdirection that never required falsehood. I would make genuine preparations for multiple possible strategies, allowing enemy scouts to observe real activities that suggested different intentions than my actual plan. I would time the release of true information to create maximum confusion about my real priorities. I would use my reputation for certain types of tactics to mask preparations for completely different approaches. Strategic ambiguity also means never revealing the full extent of your capabilities or resources. Let competitors underestimate your strength and overestimate your weaknesses. Allow them to prepare for the wrong battle, while you execute the strategy they never saw coming. The ethical line is simple. Use deception to protect yourself and create opportunities, never to harm others unnecessarily or violate genuine trust relationships. My efficiency abacus sits beside my war maps, its worn beads a testament to countless calculations of resource allocation. True strategic genius isn't about having unlimited resources, it's about extracting maximum value from minimum input and making your efforts compound rather than simply accumulate. I learned this lesson during a prolonged campaign, where my supply lines were cut and reinforcements were impossible. While my enemy had abundant resources, I had to win with what I already possessed. This limitation forced me to discover something powerful. Constraints breed creativity, and scarcity creates efficiency that abundance never teaches. Instead of lamenting my disadvantages, I began seeing them as advantages in disguise. My smaller army moved faster than their massive force. Our limited supplies forced us to live off the land, making us independent of vulnerable supply chains. Our desperate situation created unity and determination that their comfortable troops couldn't match. But the real breakthrough came when I realized I could use their superior resources against them. I observed their wasteful practices, elaborate camps that took hours to establish, heavy equipment that slowed their movement, communication systems that required extensive infrastructure. Their abundance had made them inefficient, while our scarcity had made us precise. I began targeting their supply convoys, not to capture supplies for myself, but to force them to defend longer and longer supply lines. Each successful raid meant they had to dedicate more troops to protection, reducing their offensive capabilities. I was using their own resources, their need to supply their massive army, as a weapon against them. This principle of fighting with borrowed strength became central to my strategy. Instead of building my own resources to match my opponents, I found ways to turn their resources into advantages for my cause. When they built fortifications, I used those same fortifications to limit their mobility. When they recruited local allies, I convinced those allies that their interests lay with me instead. Modern applications of this principle are everywhere. The entrepreneur who uses their competitors' marketing to educate the market about problems their solution solves better. The employee who leverages company training and relationships to build skills and networks that multiply their value. The investor who profits from market volatility that destroys others who fight against it, rather than flowing with it. Resource efficiency also means understanding the difference between effort and results. I stopped measuring success by how hard my troops worked, and started measuring by how effectively their work achieved strategic objectives. One carefully placed action that advances your position is worth more than 100 random activities that consume energy without creating progress. The key is making every resource time, energy, relationships, knowledge, even problems work multiple times for multiple purposes. True efficiency comes from systems that create compound returns, rather than linear outputs. In my study lies a collection of ancient texts on human psychology and crowd behavior, scrolls that taught me that understanding minds is infinitely more powerful than commanding bodies. The greatest victories are won in the realm of perception and belief, not on the physical battlefield where everyone else focuses their attention. I discovered this truth during a siege, where my army was significantly outnumbered. Traditional military thinking suggested we should either retreat or prepare for a costly defensive battle. Instead, I studied the psychological state of the enemy forces and found something more valuable than additional troops I found there. Fears. Through careful intelligence gathering, I learned that their army consisted largely of conscripted farmers who wanted nothing more than to return home for harvest season. Their morale was already fragile, maintained only by their belief in their numerical superiority and the inevitability of quick victory. I realized that breaking their confidence would be more effective than breaking their bodies. I orchestrated a campaign of psychological pressure that had nothing to do with direct military action. I arranged for them to discover evidence of plague in a nearby village. True information, but strategically revealed. I had my troops sing songs of home and family around our campfires, loud enough for their sentries to hear and long for their own families. I spread rumors through captured scouts about supernatural omens that foretold disaster for armies that fought during harvest season. Within 2 weeks, their superior force was crumbling from within. Desertions began slowly, then accelerated as remaining soldiers lost confidence in their cause and their chances of survival. They abandoned their siege not because we defeated them militarily, but because we defeated them psychologically. We won by changing what they believed about their situation. This principle extends far beyond warfare, into every competitive arena. Business negotiations are won by understanding what the other party truly fears and desires beneath their stated positions. Career advancement often depends more on how others perceive your value than on your actual capabilities. Market success frequently comes from understanding customer psychology rather than just creating superior products. The key is recognizing that people make decisions based on emotions and justify them with logic afterward. If you can influence the emotional foundation of their decision-making, the logical justification will follow naturally. If you try to influence only the logical aspects while ignoring emotions, you'll find yourself defeated by competitors who understand human nature more deeply. I learned to study not just what people said they wanted, but what their behavior revealed about their deeper motivations. I observed what made them confident versus insecure, what triggered their pride versus their shame, what created urgency versus complacency. This psychological intelligence became more valuable than military intelligence because it allowed me to predict and influence behavior. Modern leaders who master this principle create unstoppable influence through understanding rather than force. I keep a phoenix feather on my desk, not because I believe in mythical creatures, but because it represents the principle that great leaders rise from the ashes of apparent defeat. The darkest moments often contain the seeds of your greatest victories, but only if you possess the vision to see opportunity where others see only disaster. My most profound understanding of this principle came during what seemed like my greatest failure. I had been outmaneuvered by a brilliant enemy general who trapped my army in a valley with no apparent escape routes. My troops were demoralized, my supplies were running low, and conventional wisdom said surrender was the only option that wouldn't result in total annihilation. But crisis has a way of stripping away comfortable assumptions and forcing you to see possibilities that normal circumstances hide. As I studied our desperate situation, I began to see that our enemy's perfect trap had become a prison for them as well. They had committed their entire force to maintaining our encirclement, leaving their own territory completely undefended. Their moment of triumph had created their moment of maximum vulnerability, rather than trying to break out of their trap. I did something unexpected. I sent a small force through secret mountain passes to attack their undefended capital. While they celebrated having me cornered, I was capturing their families, their treasures, and their base of power. Within days, they were forced to abandon their perfect siege to defend what mattered most to them. Their greatest strategic success became the catalyst for their total defeat. This experience taught me that crisis often creates opportunities that don't exist during stable times. When normal rules break down, new possibilities emerge. When established players are struggling to maintain their positions, gaps open for those who can adapt quickly. When everyone else is focused on protecting what they have, the bold can seize what others cannot defend. I've observed this pattern throughout history. Economic downturns create opportunities for entrepreneurs who solve problems others ignore. Industry disruptions destroy established companies while creating space for innovators. Personal setbacks force people to develop capabilities they never knew they possessed. The key is shifting your perspective from victim to strategist when crisis strikes. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "How can I use this situation to achieve what was impossible before?" Crisis removes competitors who cannot adapt, eliminates options that were distracting you from better paths, and creates urgency that transforms planning into action. But opportunity in crisis requires preparation during prosperity. You must develop the skills, relationships, and resources during good times that enable you to move quickly when others are paralyzed by bad times. You must cultivate the mental resilience to think strategically when emotions are screaming for you to react defensively. Crisis reveals character and creates legends. Those who transform disasters into advantages become the leaders others follow when the next crisis arrives. On my desk sits a stone wheel that once required tremendous effort to turn, but now spins freely with the slightest touch. It reminds me daily that momentum, once established, becomes a force that multiplies every effort and makes the impossible seem effortless. I learned the power of momentum during my first major campaign, where I achieved a series of small victories that seemed insignificant individually, but created a psychological avalanche that swept away much larger opponents. The secret wasn't winning big battles, it was creating a pattern of wins that changed how everyone, including my own troops, believed about what was possible. My first victory was modest, capturing a minor outpost that most generals would have ignored, but I made sure this small success was highly visible, celebrating it as evidence of our superior strategy and inevitable triumph. My troops began believing they were part of a winning force. Local populations started viewing us as the likely victors. Even enemy soldiers began questioning whether they were fighting for the winning side. Each subsequent victory, no matter how small, reinforced this perception. More importantly, each success made the next success easier to achieve. Troops who believe they're invincible fight with confidence that makes them nearly invincible. Allies who believe you're destined to win offer support they would never give to someone they see as struggling. Enemies who believe your momentum is unstoppable often defeat themselves through fear and poor decisions. The key insight is that momentum creates both psychological and practical advantages. Psychologically, success breeds confidence, which improves performance, which creates more success. Practically, momentum attracts resources, supporters, and opportunities that aren't available to those who appear to be struggling. But momentum requires careful cultivation. You must choose your early battles not for their immediate strategic value, but for their momentum-building potential. This means selecting challenges you can win convincingly rather than important battles you might lose. It means making your victories visible and your progress undeniable. I learned to sequence my objectives so that each achievement created the foundation for the next one. Instead of attempting my ultimate goal immediately, I identified a series of stepping stone victories that would build the resources, confidence, and positioning needed for the final triumph. Modern leaders who understand momentum start with small wins that demonstrate their methods work. They build track records that attract better opportunities. They create success patterns that make investors, partners, and employees want to join their movement. They understand that how you win matters almost as much as what you win. The danger is losing momentum by becoming complacent after early successes, or by attempting challenges beyond your current capability. Momentum must be fed constantly with new victories, no matter how small. The wheel that stops turning becomes heavy again. I keep an ancient sundial in my study, not to tell time, but to remind myself that opportunity has its own rhythm. Winners move when others pause, strike when others hesitate, and withdraw when others rush forward. Perfect timing transforms ordinary actions into extraordinary results. In my early campaigns, I lost more battles to poor timing than to superior enemies. I would attack too early, before all conditions aligned, or too late, after the moment of advantage had passed. I learned that there's a precise window for every strategic move. Miss it by days or even hours, and the same action that could have brought victory instead guarantees defeat. I discovered this principle during a siege where I had spent months preparing the perfect assault. My intelligence was flawless, my positioning ideal, my troops ready, but I waited for even better conditions, clearer weather, one more piece of intelligence, absolute certainty of success. While I hesitated, the enemy received reinforcements that made my carefully planned attack impossible. My overcaution transformed a certain victory into a forced retreat. From that failure, I developed what I call the opportunity window recognition system. I learned to identify the exact moment when all necessary conditions converge, when your information advantage is maximum, your positioning is optimal, your resources are adequate, and your competition is unprepared. This moment rarely lasts long, and it rarely comes twice. The secret is recognizing that perfect conditions never exist. You act when conditions are sufficient, not when they're perfect. I learned to identify the minimum viable conditions for success, rather than waiting for maximum possible conditions. The general who waits for perfect weather never fights a battle in modern contexts. I've observed leaders who recognize these timing windows with remarkable precision. They launch products just as market conditions shift in their favor. They change careers at the exact moment when their industry experience becomes valuable in a different field. They invest when others are selling, not because they enjoy risk, but because they recognize when temporary conditions create permanent advantages. The key is distinguishing between preparation time and action time. During preparation time, you gather information, build relationships, develop skills, and position yourself. During action time, you execute decisively based on the preparation you've already completed. Most people confuse these phases. They either act without adequate preparation or prepare without adequate action. Timing also means knowing when not to act. I've avoided more disasters by recognizing when conditions weren't right than I've achieved victories by moving at the perfect moment. Sometimes the wisest move is waiting until your competition exhausts itself against obstacles you recognized and avoided. Perfect timing isn't about luck or intuition. It's about patient observation followed by decisive action. It's about building systems that help you recognize opportunity windows when they appear, and having the courage to act when others are paralyzed by uncertainty. The eternal flame on my desk burns continuously, fed by a simple but reliable mechanism I designed to outlast my own lifetime. It represents the difference between personal success and lasting impact, the distinction between winning for yourself and creating systems that generate victories long after you're gone. Early in my career, I measured success by battles won and territories conquered. These achievements brought immediate satisfaction, but left me troubled by a deeper question. What happens when I'm no longer here to lead? I watched brilliant generals whose armies crumbled after their deaths, their victories becoming footnotes in history rather than foundations for enduring strength. This realization changed my entire approach to strategy. I began focusing not just on winning, but on creating principles and systems that would enable others to win using the same methods. Instead of hoarding my knowledge as a competitive advantage, I started codifying it into teachable principles that could survive and spread beyond my individual presence. I developed what I call the art of war, not as a manual for my own use, but as a system that could transform ordinary leaders into strategic thinkers. I realized that my greatest victory wouldn't be any single battle I won, but the countless future victories that leaders would achieve by applying the principles I discovered and systematized. The process of building lasting legacy requires a fundamental shift in thinking. You must move from being the person who achieves results to being the person who creates systems that achieve results. You must transition from doing the work yourself to enabling others to do the work using your methods. You must focus on principles that transcend specific circumstances, rather than tactics that work only in particular situations. I learned to measure my success, not by my immediate achievements, but by the success of those who learned from my teachings. Every leader who applied my strategic principles and achieved victory became proof that my legacy was working. Every adaptation of my methods to new circumstances showed that the principles were truly universal rather than just personally effective. Building legacy also means accepting that others will eventually surpass your individual achievements using the foundations you created. The teacher's greatest triumph is when students exceed the teacher's own capabilities. The strategist's ultimate victory is when the principles become more powerful than the person who discovered them. Modern leaders who understand legacy focus on developing others, creating systems, and establishing principles that multiply their impact. They build organizations that thrive without their constant presence. They mentor successors who can take their work to new levels. They solve problems in ways that prevent similar problems from recurring. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about creating value that continues generating benefits long after you're gone. It's about building something bigger than yourself that serves purposes beyond your own success. Before you sits the master's key, a golden symbol that you now possess access to the same strategic advantages that have created winners for over 2 millennia. The secret weapon is no longer secret to you. The question now is not whether you understand these principles, but whether you will apply them with the courage and consistency that transforms knowledge into power. I have shared with you the ultimate weapon that every winner uses: superior information combined with strategic positioning. You now know how to gather intelligence others miss. Position yourself where victory becomes inevitable. Master yourself before attempting to master circumstances, and create momentum that becomes unstoppable. These aren't theories, they are battle-tested principles that have guided victorious leaders from ancient battlefields to modern boardrooms. But knowledge without action is merely entertainment. The difference between those who learn these principles and those who benefit from them lies in implementation. You must choose. Will you continue fighting with ordinary methods that require extraordinary effort, or will you embrace the strategic advantages that make extraordinary results seem effortless? Start with superior information. Begin today building sources of insight that your competitors don't have. Develop relationships that provide early warning of changes in your industry. Learn to see patterns that others miss by asking better questions and connecting seemingly unrelated developments. Then position yourself strategically. Instead of competing directly where everyone else fights, find positions where natural forces work in your favor. Become indispensable rather than replaceable. Create scenarios where opportunities come to you instead of chasing opportunities that others also pursue. Master the inner game before focusing on external competition. Develop the emotional discipline to think clearly under pressure, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the courage to act decisively when that moment arrives. Your mind is your primary weapon. Keep it sharp through daily practice, Remember that this secret weapon multiplies every other advantage you possess. Better skills become exponentially more valuable when applied with strategic positioning. Harder work produces breakthrough results when guided by superior information. Greater effort creates unstoppable momentum when focused on the right objectives at the right time. The path I've shown you isn't just about winning, it's about winning in a way that creates sustained advantage rather than temporary success. It's about building momentum that becomes self-perpetuating, developing capabilities that compound over time, and creating value that serves purposes beyond your immediate goals. You now hold the same principles that guided my victories and the victories of countless leaders who followed. The secret weapon is yours to wield. The only question remaining is whether you'll honor these teachings by putting them into practice, or let them remain merely interesting ideas that never transform your reality. The choice, as always, is yours. Choose wisely. Choose strategically. Choose like the winner you now have the tools to become.